Thank you, Brett Bursey, for being here for this interview. I'm going to focus on just the events that happened at USC in the spring of 1970 for this purpose of this interview. But since this was kind of the beginning of your hell-raising career, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about how you got to that point. So when you arrived at USC, what was the year?
1968.
And so where had you been right before that?
I attended the University of South Carolina Extension in Beaufort for a semester after having transferred from the University of Georgia, where I bombed out by not knowing where to put commas. So I put them everywhere and had a wonderful summer up there at the last resort, the first Flower Children in 1960, probably at that point, 8 in Athens, Georgia.
So talk to me a little bit about Parris Island, though. You had, how many years were you there?
My father was stationed there for 4 years, from 62 to 66. And so I went when I was going into the 10th grade and did the 11th and most of the 12th and graduated from Beaufort High School in 1966. They segregated Beaufort High School, but I would not honor it by saying that. It was a segregated high school that picked in 1966 picked the son of the only Black attorney in town to integrate the school, and so I'm hard pressed to say that I graduated from an integrated high school.
So when you went to USC, you were intending to study, or you did study. What was your plan?
Well, I had been on a track for quite some time, believing that I was going to be in international politics. I was quite taken. My father had been stationed in Taiwan. He was the generalissimo, the dictator Chiang Kai-shek's dentist for 4 years. And I was interested in being a diplomat. And I studied international policy. It was my major at the University of South Carolina, which was a problem because I learned that I couldn't support my own government's policies.
So by 68, you were you involved with the GI movement in Columbia at all?
I was AWARE, the organization that was the activist faction on campus. AWARE was not an acronym for anything, it was just AWARE. And I had been involved with the Southern Student Organizing Committee at the University of Georgia as a member and activist, but not as an organizer. And when I enrolled at the main campus in 68 at the University in Columbia, I got involved immediately in AWARE, and it was easy to be a large frog in a small pond, and I became the chairman of AWARE right off the bat, it seems, and was also, my job title was state traveler, as in fellow traveler. For the, I was the traveler for the, South Carolina for the Southern Student Organizing Committee. And I can't remember how much they paid me. It was either $15 a week or $15 a month, but it wasn't a lot of money. And they gave me a van, a really cool van that used to belong to the telephone company. So it was one of these green vans with the racks on top and all, and you could park it anywhere. It was great. I'm not sure that answered your question, Ms. Robbins. Repeat it.
I know, but I mean, so AWARE had already been started by the time you came on board, but I was kind of going to go before AWARE, or maybe I'm trying to get things in place in time without getting caught up in dates and everything. But I know that you had some connections with the UFO, but it seems to be kind of vague in your memory, but it's all there in the documents that I've been reading, that AWARE was involved with GIs United against the Vietnam War, and a lot of it was going through the
Yeah, we
years.
should leave my memory out of this, Ms.
So it
Robbins.
kind
But
of is
yeah,
all the way in
the
my head.
UFO coffee house was a place I frequented. I was friends with the people that were running it, friends and comrades. I was really focused on campus organizing. That was my job. And that's not to say that I wasn't one of the best, if not the best volunteer for the work that was being done with GIs. That was, I mean, there were different pockets of that work. There was the UFO and people around that. Then there was this emerging faction that was just radical GIs. What can I do? And then a good percentage of them um, were criminal investigation division, the CID. And then we had an influx that I became aware of. They were already influxed that had been related to and were related to the Socialist Workers Party that became the core of the Fort Jackson 8. And so that was happening contiguous with my time hanging out at UFO. And the UFO was it was a coffee house, and it very careful not to break any laws. Right directly across the street from the city hall in Columbia on Main Street, right down a few blocks down from the State House, and there was entertainment and reading material, coffee, food, conviviality, and it on the weekends when the GIs, the reason the UFO was in Columbia was that Fort Jackson, a base in Columbia, South Carolina, that goes all the way back to World War II, was the largest training base in the United States. It was one on the East Coast and the West Coast, and Fort Jackson was the place you go if you signed up anywhere on the East Coast. So it was huge. And those people that were concerned about the war in Vietnam saw that as an opportunity to be able to talk to draftees. Remember, we're looking at a war where people didn't have they didn't all volunteer by any stretch. And so the politics of the UFO were very soft, so to speak, soft from the standpoint that they were opposed to the war, but they weren't militant by any stretch. They were more in line with the Quakers, the Friends, the American Friends Service Committee was one of the prime organizers behind the UFO Coffee House and other coffee houses that followed. And so they were raising liberal pacifist money. And so it was an opposition to war, and it wasn't necessarily kind of the hard-nosed opposition that many young people were becoming engaged in against imperialism and capitalism and the type of economy that America thrives on that requires war.
I'm just gonna. I just think that the UFO, though. I mean, I knew it existed, but I didn't really appreciate the impact that I had. It was only open for 2 years, and it did change over time. And when Fred Gardner came from the left coast to kind of set it up, he was only there for a few months, but his notion, reading his stuff about it later on, that he became jaded just about the left movement in general, but specifically in terms of like using the UFO coffee house it became a model for other coffee houses across the country and even overseas. So it was really important, but his vision for that was different from what emerged from that. And I'm not sure which one was right, and I'm not sure that they needed to be, mutually exclusive. But when he set it up, it was, I mean, he was a GI himself, so he understood that community, understood the pressures on them. He understood the war in Vietnam. Um, and he didn't feel comfortable with putting them in a position. He was critical of people, I guess, like you, that kind of put people like the GIs at Fort Jackson in harm's way because they had putting their asses on the line was a lot more risky than it was for, civilian folks. I mean, sometimes anyway. I'm not, I'm
No,
just
you didn't express that well because I don't recall putting anybody's ass on the line.
at the beginning.
One of the biggest tropes of mythology that came out of the Vietnam War is that the people like myself that were opposed to the war in Vietnam were opposed to the soldiers, and we were all had training sessions and midnight discussions and little books to read And one of my orientations, not necessarily coming from a pacifist line, but from a class conscious organizing line, was that the war was good business, investors' sons, and that the soldiers were victims, and that we needed to make them aware of that. And so it was an educational campaign that war was something that was promoted by moneyed interest, and that it wasn't serving your interest. And so it was an educational campaign coming from different angles. One angle was a Pacific angle about how you shouldn't hurt people, that's wrong. And another was a different angle, and an analytical angle from a social construct, that the predatory nature of our foreign policy was basically colonial when it started in supporting the French colonization effort in the 50s. And then we can call it imperialism, but it was an extractive and exploitive policy that we felt would not turn out well, and that was quite correct. It did not turn out well.
I'm just bringing it back to like his idea of whether that was a strategic, what's the strategic posture of civilian allies in the GI movement is kind of the question. I'm not sure there's a singular answer to that, but I do, even his own position kind of evolved over time. And he thought at the beginning it was just supposed to be like this neutral place for folks to go hang out and get information and sit with people of like mind, right? And that once they had a chance to feel safe and talk about what was on their minds, that they would naturally gravitate toward some kind of politicization and then get the, you know, the resources that they had offered and all that kind of stuff. But it was less, I guess, pushy, for lack of better words. But I appreciate you talking about that there is a lot of tropes about there's that animosity that people want to create between the civilian and the military thing
Oh,
is contrived for reasons that serve other purposes than the movement. On the other hand, I think that there's room for criticism, right? So
I would, yes, I would say that both sides are right. I don't think that's a black and white, and you can't make empirical judgments about tactics when you're dealing with different people with different motives and different perceptions of what their goals are.
yeah.
That I was younger than Gardner. I don't remember ever meeting Fred. I was close to the people that ran the UFO, spent a lot of time in their house. They had two communes or collectives during the time I knew them. There was another house where the GI organizers was going on, where I remember running a mimeograph machine for short times. But there's a lot of different individuals, and some of them, like myself, was I got 3 pre-induction physicals called up to Fort Jackson, where you had to show up or you go to jail. And so Fred had been through that, and I hadn't been. So this war was moving really rapidly into the living rooms of America. And that the by the time, I mean, you said the UFO lasted 2 years. That 2 years, there was a explosion of opposition against war in Vietnam. I mean, and I was one of the people probably that was chanting, one side's right, one side's wrong. We're on the side of the Viet Cong. So that wasn't really necessarily going to endear you into the hearts and minds of a lot of the soldiers, but things were moving really rapidly, to the degree that we had one of the large problems that we're having in Vietnam by 68 and 69 was GIs blowing up their own commanders in an incident called fragging, where you roll a grenade into their tent.
So I'm just interested in knowing what kind of relationship that you had with GIs in Colombia that you were trying to organize with, and people that were your age that were headed to Vietnam. What kind of conversations did you have? How did it feel being in your position and not going?
Well, those are several different questions. I'll try and dissect them and answer them one at a time. Relationship with GIs was certainly primarily with GIs who were opposed to the war. That's who I was meeting. That's who was coming to the UFO. That's who was hanging out. And so these were people that really appreciated civilian opposition to the war and civilian appreciation of their opposition to the war that wasn't like mad at them for being baby killers. So there was a really conviviality and a camaraderie relationship between the anti-war civilians and the GIs that felt that they were being given a raw deal. And there was a kind of another level of relationships with people like Jerry Holiday, who you've spoken to, where I personally met people and helped them get off the base or go to Canada or, leave, get away from it. That was the other thing. But back over on the campus side, we're not talking about people that have that GI mentality, which is, as you know, a very distinct position to find oneself in, to be in the green machine, and that the the regimentation cannot be underestimated. The strength of the animosity towards people that would dare speak ill of the U.S. ventures was remarkable. So over on the campus side, none of those dynamics were in effect. There were people that were really pissed off about the war, and it wasn't yet the type of circumstance that the GIs found themselves in. It was a circumstance where I believe the civilians felt much freer to be able to criticize and oppose the war. And so those different streams met and related well, but they were different streams. And that most of the work that I did was campus related. As a SOC organizer, I was involved with 8 different campuses in South Carolina. And that was not easy. The majority of the students in South Carolina were oblivious to the war, or certainly not opposed to it. And so that was swimming in different waters.
So anybody that doesn't know what SOC is?
The Southern Student Organizing Committee, SSOC, SOC, was formed in 1964 when the white students that had been working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, since the early 60s, most notably the 62, 63 Mississippi Freedom Summer, when the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, with Ella Baker involvement, was encouraging white students to spend time helping and do voter registration in the Deep South. And just the past former Chief Justice of the state of South Carolina, Gene Toll, as a student at Agnes Scott, went on the 63 freedom rides to Mississippi and spent time down there. There are a lot of liberal white people that did that. There became a mutual understanding, certainly after the Goodman, Cheney, and Swerner killings in 63 or 62, don't pin me down on the date, but it was real clear that what the white students needed to do was not come south and talk to Black people about oppression, but to talk to white students about oppression. And so that seemed to be a fairly clear analysis of the circumstance. And so there was a withdrawal of the white students from the Southern Student Organizing Committee in 64, forming the Southern Student Organizing Committee with great organizers, old-time activists like Ann Braden. Majeska Simpkins was a friend of hers. I didn't know Majeska then, but that the focus was on white campuses across the South. And I was the campus organizer, the state traveler for South Carolina. And it was clear, SOC started as a civil rights group, morphed into an anti-war group, with people like me being more on the firing line of Vietnam, and that was not limited to white people that had been civil rights activists. The SNCC people like Stokely Carmichael and Rap Brown and those folks came out of it immediately being able to relate the commonality of the struggle of the Vietnamese people to the colonization and the mistreatment of Black people in America. And so that was part of the international analysis, the international working class that we saw the United States having a third world circumstance within our own country.
So were you already involved in SOC by the time you were involved with AWARE?
My first involvement with SOC was at the University of Georgia in 1966. It was right after I'd gotten there. And I guess November, because that's when elections are. And the governor's race in November 66 pitted Bo Calloway, who'd been a former Secretary of the Navy, whose family owned Callaway Gardens, which is this bourgeois spot in Georgia where people go watch water skiers and stuff. And so Bo Calloway, one of your like school, thoughtful, good appearing, good old boys, versus Lester Maddox. And Lester Maddox was a stone cold racist. And this is 66. And Lester Maddox had a high profile of opposing integration. And he had a restaurant in Atlanta called the Pickrick. And Lester turned his sign out and said, "This light turned off by LBJ." And he closed the restaurant and ran for governor. And I was at University of Georgia, and we weren't like terribly enlightened, but there was just a rather general sense amongst young men and women that were going to college that, good Lord, this man is dumb and an embarrassment. And so it wasn't so much as, he was a Klansman or what he was in favor of. It was just he was embarrassingly stupid. And he won. And so there was a march at the University of Georgia in 66, aimed around that election, Lester Maddox winning, around racism. And I got involved in SOC then.
All right. We're going to circle back to these topics when we talk about you, but I was just kind of, in terms of AWARE, because apparently one of the first orders of business at AWARE, according to FBI file that I read, was that they affiliated with SOC, was where I was going with that question. Were you there for that meeting? Is that why that
That
happened?
was the reason that happened.
That was my question.
That
So
was an easy question. You didn't ask it properly.
well, you didn't give me a chance, man. So yeah, so that was like one of the first things that I became aware was about the White Awareness Week that y'all proposed. Was that one of the first actions?
That was down the road. That was in 69.
On the first anniversary of the Orangeburg massacre, right?
Yeah. And so I'd already been there in 68.
Or was that the reason that happened?
Yeah.
That was why you timed it then?
Yeah. And a way to understand what it was aimed at was that we were going to call it Black Awareness Week to begin with. And I decided that it was really white awareness that we needed. And I've still got a sticker on my file cabinet that says white awareness of political, economic, and democratic. White awareness of those things is a democratic necessity. And it's democracy. And so we did the White Awareness Week, and we had some really incredible people there. Harry Boyd, longtime union organizer in North Carolina. Eugene McBride Dabbs, one of the organizers from the 30s, a white landed gentry of South Carolina who was opposed to integration. And so it was a week long of events in the Russell House at a time when students could drink beer, and that it ended with a call from AWARE for the university to quit using Confederate flags and playing Dixie at sporting events. And they would run onto the football field or the basketball field with Confederate flags playing Dixie. And that the other demand was to take the flag down off the dome. And so that was 69. The flag had been up there for 8 years then. And I recall the early organizing of that.
Because there's a lot of talk about the flag flying on the horseshoe. Was it ever flying on the horseshoe?
No.
Continue.
No. We burned it on the horseshoe.
Well, that's there.
And I got arrested.
I know.
But that the White Awareness Week was a really substantive substantive seminar of discussions about prevailing attitudes and discrimination that had the demands to quit flying the flag and using the song. And we demanded to President Jones of the university that that happen, and he agreed. And so, full of ourselves, we marched up to the State House to demand they take it off the State House dome. And I think that was around the time, I can't remember the exact moment the light bulb went off, that there are no black people here in the states. A third of the voters in South Carolina are people of color, and there were no elected black officials in South Carolina in 1969. There may have been one or two somewhere out in the many little towns and all, but there were no black legislators or congresspeople in South Carolina from the late 1890s until 1970. And so at that point, it was a white Democratic Party that was the white supremacist party.
So you made the leap from that to burning the flag on the president's lawn?
Wasn't much of a leap. I mean, we were right there anyway on the horseshoe.
I haven't found any footage of that or anything. It's like it seemed, I mean, how planned was it? And why were there not other people involved? And I don't know.
It
The
was.
event itself, I'm not picturing because there's not really any.
I read some of the same FBI stuff you did that blamed me for bringing the flag and a bottle of alcohol, not Jim Beam, but rubbing alcohol, to the Aware meeting that night, when it was decided that we were going to go to Jones's house and leave a note on his door if he wasn't there about taking the flag down. And it was subsequent to that the flag was burned right there on the horseshoe in front of Jones's house.
It was burned very passively. It just like self-ignited.
No comment. There were a number of matches struck. Let me put it that way.
It seemed like it just struck me as weird that this thing happened of note, and I just didn't know how much preparation was involved and who all thought it was a great idea, how many people were standing around watching it happen. How soon after that did you get arrested?
It was actually several days later that they arrested me, but it was on the closure of an Aware meeting where we decided to post the thing at Jones's house. Somebody in the crowd happened to have a Confederate flag with some alcohol and some matches. And so that group then marched over to Jones's house. He wasn't there. I don't know whether we nailed the edict to his door like Martin Luther did, but we left this note on his door and backed up a few feet and burned the Confederate flag. One of the people that was with us was punched in the nose by some bypasser, but there wasn't an audience. It wasn't announced. It was something that came at the end of an Aware meeting from the Russell House, which is what, a few hundred yards from the president's home. Marched over there, did the thing, and left. And subsequent to that, there were Confederate flags burned all over the state. And
by whom?
Mostly by black students. Voorhees, Denmark, in Denmark, State College, the University of South Carolina.
Had anybody done that before? I mean, I hadn't thought about that before.
I'm unaware of there being what would amount to an illegal protest against the flag prior to that. It was at the time illegal to defy, deface, or cast contempt by word or deed upon flags of the Confederacy, ma'am. And I was contemptuous and cast it.
Why are you using the past tense?
I guess because I've spent enough time in jail. Thank you.
So so you weren't arrested right away, you say, but
no, I actually just read something the other day in one of the papers that you dug up about. It was a couple days later. We need to get more FBI files to find out when and where that happened. I can't remember
to be all that specific, but what did surprise me, I don't know why it does at this point, but haha, ignited like this thing
It did. It did.
really, really made the young Republicans and the Birchers and the Young Americans for Freedom, and I don't know what other groups they had on campus.
Mm.
Um, but it really lit their fuse, and they were like, I've seen photos of them. They had the Confederate flags flying from the honeycombs, and there's pictures of them all around the Confederate monument with their Confederate flags. I mean, they did their own kind of like counter protest because that. And I mean, as long as I've lived here, bro, I really still don't understand the phenomenon of, boy, on both sides, that flag, man, it just, there's nothing that gets people so up in arms as that dang flag. How do you
Well, this is you've been here long enough to figure out that. I mean, you've heard it referred to as the original sin. It's the thing that holds everything back, and the history of it is so deep and tortured and convoluted and disguised that is part of what makes it complicated to unravel. Is that the historically there's no doubt that the same rich white guys have been running the show since the beginning of the show, and they still do. Now, how do they retain power when they're exploiting white working people? Well, let's give the white working people something they don't have, which is respect and dignity, because the black people don't have it. So that type of wedge that has been driven between the black and white people, black and white working class people, has been effective. And that as the times are hard sometimes, and white working class people ain't got a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, they're gonna blame it on black people. And so it's very effective. And it's also the nobility of the lost cause. And I grew up in the South. I had the Confederate flag. I had a dog named Rebel. I've got my granddaddy, great granddaddy's Confederate flag. What
I didn't know about that story. I thought I knew.
about the dog named Rebel?
Whose idea was that?
Mine? No, there was a time when it was just a cultural cachet. It had nothing to do with racism. It was cool because the Yankees were rude and we were not, and that we were rebels. Everybody, I don't, not everybody, but I'm sure the majority of testosterone-driven young men have a sense of rebellion in them, and so the rebelness of the heritage fed into that. And so there was a cultural element of it that I think is very difficult for people to understand.
But
Um,
you know, they lost, right?
Ma'am,
They lost.
I'm sorry. Where do you live?
It's just weird. I'm sorry.
Who
It's just weird.
who runs your state, honey?
All right. We're okay. We're in a ditch.
You in a ditch, baby. No, that's a really wonderful opportunity for me to share with you another reality check. Is that when Henry McMaster has his foot on your neck and you can't get up, he can't go anywhere. So you both stay in a ditch. Take that, Henry.
Okay. Well, since you brought him up, I can't resist this opportunity. My favorite story about McMaster and you.
Well, sweetie, you're jumping way ahead in the time.
I know. This is
Just
gonna,
the time clock up.
I know. But tell me that anyway.
Lord.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do know what you're talking about because
I'm
it
just
was
going.
but it was only a piece of a very amazing
No,
uh,
this is going to be
uh,
important
s- s-
because you won't follow.
number of situations. I am under arrest for a felony for having a gun at my bedside table. And I couldn't have a gun in my bedside table because 10 years earlier than that, I'd painted "Hell No, We Won't Go" on my draft board wall and was convicted of a crime punishable by more than a year in jail, served nearly 2 years in prison for spray painting "Hell No, We Won't Go" on my draft board wall. And so many years later, some friends of mine, acquaintances of mine, were killed in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1979 by the Klan and Nazis. Brutal government hit squad. We know that because one of my homeboys, my best friend Liz Pitts, was the attorney for the survivors of the shooting of what was referred to as the Greensboro Massacre. And I had, fast forward a year from the shooting in November of 79 to October, November 80, and they arrested some Klan and Nazis. And the prosecution had pictures that the alcohol and tobacco and firearms agent, the ATF federal agent, had given pictures of the people that the government wanted killed to the Klan and Nazis, who went forth and killed them. It was a government hit squad. And so a year after the killings, the trial, the state level trial of the Klan and Nazis, the Klan and Nazis were found not guilty. And they went on television and did all this stuff about it was a great day for white people and y'all come to the Carolinas because we're going to keep the black people in perspective. And so I organized a press conference in front of the federal building in Columbia, South Carolina, where the Alcohol and Tobacco Firearms Office is. And we had a lot of people, a lot of ministers. I remember Joe Darby was there, dragged Joe into this. And I said right there at the press conference that the ATF was criminally complicit in the killings of those people. I got a phone call, I think it was the next day, if not shortly thereafter, from a gentleman who described himself as an agent for the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division. And he wanted me to come in and talk to him. I said, I don't believe I have anything to say to you, sir. Gave him the name of one of my attorneys and said, get in touch with him. Didn't hear anything else until it was really interesting. It was the day that Tom Turnipseed, as a state senator, was giving the eloquent argument against some anti-abortion bill in the state house. And we had a rally, a choice rally. And a reporter came up to me from the state newspaper and wanted my comments on the federal indictment. What indictment? Well, you were indicted by the federal grand jury for felonious possession of a handgun. And so that was the first I heard of it. Fast forward a number of months and we're in court. Becci, this story is way too deep and complicated. Well, I'll cut past the judge who was Strom Thurmond's former law partner, who I had already been to war with over the bomb plant, to Henry McMaster having been appointed just shortly before I'm engaging him as the U.S. attorney. The sitting U.S. attorney, Vincent Leidy, died. Henry McMaster was appointed, and Henry comes in and stops this hearing that's going on with the judge and calls me back into his room right there in the federal courthouse. And he's talking to me about making a deal here. And he offers me probation if I plead guilty to a felony because I'd committed a misdemeanor 10 years earlier. I said, Henry, that doesn't make any sense to me. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. And you know what? Judge Simons has set the trial date in courtroom B at 10 o'clock on April 24th. And you know what, Henry? At 10 o'clock on April 24th, I'm going to be in courtroom A in the final hearing with 3 federal judges on the license of the nuclear reactor out there in Jenkinsville. And you're going to have to send the marshals in and drag me out because I'm not coming to your trial. And you know what, Henry? People are going to think you covering up for the power company. Not a good political move. Henry asked me some questions. He said, well, I've never met a vegetarian. What's that like? And I had to give Henry my nutritional and spiritual and environmental arguments for not eating carnivores. And we talked for a little while, and Henry kept trying to make deals with me. And Henry finally said, I guess the only thing I can do is just dismiss the charges. I said, Henry, I think that'd be a really wise career move for you. And he did. and it has been for both of us.
I know. Did you have any idea at that point that he would be your governor?
I was feathering that nest, sweetheart. No permanent enemies, no permanent friends, only temporary allies.
Weird how this all works. Like,
He's really gone over the edge, though. I mean, we're going to talk about Henry. I'm something. He got one of them worms in his brain. Let me tell you.
all right, we again in a ditch.
We'll
So
have to,
that was a long ass story.
it had no relevance to what we're talking about, actually.
So much of this is never going to see the light of day.
Oh, save it anyway. It might be amusing to somebody sometime.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we haven't even gotten to the three things I wanted to talk to you about.
Why don't you outline what those three are so I can know that we've got to move on?
The three things were the Nixon protest, draft board conflagration, and the Russell House thing that you
Lord God, woman, that's a
know.
lifetime of work.
Well,
Let's go.
keep it.
Okay, Brandon.
Wait a minute, let me ask you a question.
Oh.
So, oh, after you burned the damn flag, Aware was put on probation, but not even a month later, y'all were protesting Nixon. And I'm just wondering how you did that while you were on probation, and what were you organizing off campus? Was it
Probation didn't mean anything other than don't mess up again.
was the Nixon protest, and why were you so dang pissed off at Nixon?
Well, one of the reasons was because of Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. And
Just
he had
promises, right?
he had just been inaugurated in 68. And so this is what?
But he lied. That's why people were pissed off. I mean, he campaigned on closing that war, and then as soon as he gets in office, he goes into Cambodia. So it was like he reneged on a campaign promise, right?
Actually, Cambodia was in May of 70. That's what sparked Kent State. So you got your dates a little screwy there. But the fact of the matter is that he was what?
That is where we are. I'm trying to get you to the spring of 1970.
But you started out with Nixon in 69.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
I know I'm right. I was there.
I'm saying.
Okay. We protested Nixon in 1969 at the airport in Columbia.
He got inaugurated. He had promised to do certain things that he didn't hold true to. So that part is true.
Right. Fact of the matter is, none of us believed he was going to do that anyway, and so we're going to protest the war anyway. Okay. We weren't holding our breath for him to do the right thing. And so there were a goodly number of students that had met the night before in the Russell House Theater, several hundred students, with a plan. We made signs and all of the plans to go out and protest at the airport when Nixon came to town, not knowing until just recently that he was coming to town to honor Jimmy Burns, who would have been occasion for another whole protest about another war. But we'll stay tuned for the book. But that when we got there, and we knew they were coming, but there were 1199, the hospital workers in Charleston had been on strike, and they were there. They came up. And so there was a confluence of protesters that were trying to organize in Charleston that had been out on strike. There was a big national civil rights issue. Were there, but that the authorities focused on the young white people with signs that were dismissive of the president and his war in Vietnam. And they told us that we couldn't bring our signs into this area they had roped off at the airport. And there were several thousand people in that same roped off area with signs that were in favor of Nixon and bombing Hanoi back to the Stone Age. Actually had signs that said bomb Hanoi back to the Stone Age. And that they told us we couldn't come in. And I remember distinctly having what I thought was a rational and civil conversation with Sheriff Carroll Day, who was the sheriff of Lexington County at the time, about civil rights and about how he could not judge our expression of freedom of speech based on the content of our signs. And there's film of this, film 11, back when they used film, he motions like this, bring the bus in, and they jumped on people, beat up some people. Myself was blackjacked on the top of the head and the back, my back, by a young guy named Jimmy Metz. And they arrested, I think it was 11. I read in the newspaper later it was 9, but somewhere between 9 and 11 people were arrested for trespassing at the airport. And you want me to go into the details of the jailing?
Good, because one of them had their shoulder dislocated. I thought that was a little rude.
It was, and they were very rude. And I was trying to get the fellow whose arm was turning blue some medical attention, and somehow the gendarmes decided I was the head agitator, and they separated me from the crowd. Were rude to me. Yes, they were rude. They were physically violent, and they put me in the hole. And I had never truly experienced the hole, but I was in this room that was completely black for 3 days with there was no bed, there was no bedding, there was a hole in the floor, and it was my first psychedelic experience. It was quite exciting. You should try it sometime. And that I got out to find that I had been charged with felonious assault of a police officer, which carried 20 years in jail. Don't know that I'd turned 21 yet. Well, that's a long time for somebody like 20 years old to look at 20 years in prison. And I had been charged with assaulting this young cop named Jimmy Metz. That kept me from going on the Vince Ramos Brigade, because you couldn't go on the Vince Ramos Brigade with felony charges against you. And my father, God bless him, disagreed with everything I'd ever done, but hired an expensive lawyer and paid my bail. And we fought the case. And the trespassing charge was dismissed by an appeals court, and that the lawyer for the trespassing case was Charles Morgan. And Morgan at the time, and I didn't know this, I'm so humiliated that I was young and didn't know who these people were that were helping me. But Morgan was at the time Julian Bond's attorney. The state of Georgia, Bond had won election in the legislature in 1968. The legislature said, "You can't be a legislator, boy. You're against Vietnam. You're probably a communist." And so he appealed, and it went up through the ranks, and Charles Morgan got him his seat back. And Morgan was also at the same time Muhammad Ali's lawyer, and Ali had refused to go to join the military when he was drafted. And so that case was overturned, because you can't arrest someone for trespassing on public property unless they're breaking a law. And so I was off on that case, though I had not been a player in that, because I had the felony case, but that charge went away. And when that charge went away, I had a right to assault Jimmy Metz. And Jimmy Metz years later became my neighbor and my buddy, and that's another story.
And then what?
And
What
then,
happened to the Mets landing sign?
say again, please.
The Mets landing sign?
Well, you just jumped 20 years down the road, sweetheart. I'm going to have to rein you back in. You had three questions. One was the airport. One was
No, but you brought up Jimmy Metz. I'm just saying, finish.
well, we're going to get that later.
Oh my God. The draft board stuff, because that was, in the grand scheme of things, that was the next thing.
What was the last thing, the third thing?
The third thing is the Russell House and the
Okay.
administration
Well,
building.
those are chronologically sequential, Ms. Robbins. You're
I know,
correct.
that's what I'm saying. But the Russell House, you were there sort of. The administration building, you weren't, but Weatherford was. So I don't want to get dragged too deeply into any of this for the purpose of this conversation. But I did really want to know, you know, how did the draft board thing come about? I've read that there were 4 people involved. I've only read that in one place, and you don't even remember 4 people involved.
I do.
At the very least, it was you and Jack. So I don't know what happened to those other 2 people.
Greg Merrick and Doug Doug Boldware or Doug Boldware. Um, I saw Merrick's name, and it reminded me when you had a list of people that were at the either administration building or the sit-in at the Russell House. And so we glossed over the sit-in at the Russell House, which is a predicate to a lot of this stuff. But
No, the Russell House came after the draft board.
you're right. Okay.
So like,
But the predicate to the storing of the administration building.
yeah.
So the draft board thing, it was National Anti-Draft Week, and we were aware, and we were very opposed to the draft, and so we thought we should do something. And the we is in a large part me encouraging the group to do something. And the something never really got together, and so the backup plan was to go vandalize the draft board.
Can we, I'm just curious, as a person that's been in a lot of those kind of meetings, was the opposition just there wasn't enough time? Was it people didn't think it was a smart thing to do? Um, any background there?
I'm not sure that there was more than there wasn't time and will. Um, a clever theater skit. People, and yourself, you know this, aren't willing to put themselves in public making fools of themselves is the way it would be perceived. Not a problem I've ever had. And that the idea would have been some die-in or some dramatic thing. I'm sure we had better ideas that I can't remember now at the draft board itself, in which case you'd have the media involved. And since that didn't work, the low threshold was simply to go and paint. Hell no, we won't go on draft board, won't. And then that it went further into breaking a window and throwing red paint on the draft files, indicative of the blood of the young people of South Carolina. And that happened late one evening at the draft board at Gervais Street. That was my draft board at the time. And a window was broken, red paint was thrown in. Hell no, we won't go was spray painted on the wall, and peace now, which I think is a communist slogan, was painted on the wall. And we left. And there's a whole lot more that was known after we got to read the indictments and the testimony and the FBI records. But the four people that were there, it's real clear that one of them, who was the co-chair of the Aware Group, who's one of my best friends for the better part of a year, Jack Weatherford, was a sled agent, and I didn't know that until the trial. But Jack and I were arrested literally the next day in the Russell House at a Student Affairs Committee hearing to determine whether Aware's charter as a campus organization should be revoked. The door flew open, sled agents rushed in, threw me and Jack up against the wall, and arrested us, handcuffed us together, and put us in the back of a car and took us away and booked us. And that was somewhere in the spring, and the trial was not until late August, I think it was. And so during that time, Weatherford had numerous occasions to meet with me and my attorney, Rock Wise, out of Greenwood, to discuss the case. And just leaving a whole lot of interesting details out, we'll just say that it became evident that I was going to go to jail when Senator Ford, John Ford, who was a cartoon character cast by Disneyland to an ignorant Southern solicitor, called the first witness to the prosecution, Jack Weatherford. And the first question for Weatherford was, how long have you been an agent for the State Law Enforcement Division? And he said, about a year and a half. And what was your job at SLED? And he says, to watch Mr. Bursey. And so I think that my mind was blown, because he was like a really good friend, and he really understood what we were doing and why we were doing it. And it was hard to conceptualize someone doing that that knew what it was that we knew while we were doing it. And I've never really been able to process that, nor do I want to. I don't want to have that ability to rationalize that. And so
When was the last time you talked with him?
when they put me in the paddy wagon, right after that trial,
Did you really know how to hurt a guy?
yeah, that's what I said.
And he said,
You did it to yourself, Bursey.
right. If you think you're going to get a chance to talk to him?
I'm
Would
not sure I want one. I'm not sure I want one. I think he's really smart. I think he's got, certainly, he's developed a really strong rationale for what he did and feels that what he did, he has to, feels that what he did was justifiable. And I go back and forth. I really don't know what would come of a conversation like that.
Yeah.
We're probably both best left to their own devices.
Well, yeah, maybe. I just, one of the things I really respect about you is that you haven't um, let that um, make you paranoid about the people that you, at least you don't let me know about it, that you're not paranoid about people that you let into your life and that you've
I'm, my, I have nothing to I have nothing to hide. That is what it came down to and comes down to. If you had a cop living intimately with me for a year, over a year, and the worst thing you caught me doing was spray painting something on a draft board wall, and you put me in prison for that, I'm not sure I'm the party that needs to be examining their motives. And that I honestly believe that um, I salute the divinity within you with all the divine grace of my mind and all the love and cordiality of my heart. I mean, I want to see the best of people. I want to believe the best of people. And I'm not going to let them take that away from me.
well, it's getting later than I wanted it to be, but while we're going to have to do another interview, but while we're talking about Jack Weatherford, I wanted to know what you think about him being, as Joe Goodman said, that he's not just an informant, but he was an agent provocateur, which is like a whole different kettle of fish, right? So it's like one thing to just sit in on meetings and being this passive kind of observer that you can kind of
Well,
warn.
he was never a passive observer in that he was a leader of an organization and he could articulate the line as to why we should not be in Vietnam, why male supremacy was wrong, why white supremacy was wrong. So he had all the right lines. That's provocative in the sense that he was engaging people to come to our side.
But do
So
you really,
that was something.
let me just ask you this: do you think he really believed that? Is he that that over the
I
edge?
mean, that's part of the Jack Weatherford we'll never know. I mean, I would like to think he was psychotic. That he was not somebody that could be trained to do that. This is what my analysis came down to. If I thought they could train people to be that person, whew, that's really scary. I think he had to see he was gay. He was undercover gay. So he was easy to recruit to be another undercover. He already had a second persona.
Wait a minute. This is the first time I'm hearing that.
Oh yeah. That the people that recruited him to be an agent were gay narcotics agents.
Dude, the thing that I heard
His
was it
brother had been
brother
arrested.
because of
Okay.
so like they had dirt on his brother, and that was the
I know for a fact that Sonny Clark and Dickie Freeman, who's still alive, you need to track Dickie down, pinned Weatherford as somebody that they could work with because they knew he was gay.
what?
And they were gay. Sonny Clark died of AIDS. Sonny Clark was the head narcotics agent. We had a narcotics group in Richland County Police, and you've talked to Leon Law about this, that were off the chain. I know people whose door they kicked down, stole their drugs and said, call the cops, motherfucker. And because you can't call the cops when the cops steal your drugs. And so there was a really sleazy element of this narcotic stuff going on. Those are some of the people that I know were handling Weatherford. And we also know that Weatherford was gay. And we also know that Weatherford ended up marrying a Walker Maybank who lived with Fran. And so it's all this kind of convoluted stuff that is just so difficult to separate out in terms of figuring out where this man's mind was, that I just as soon not go there. So what was your question, Ms. Robin?
No, I really didn't want to go down that rabbit hole, of which there are so many, but let's just for tonight, let's end with
I think we do need to have something in whatever we do about the complicated nature of Weatherford as a human being.
absolutely. No, Brett, this is like a whole another, oh no, this is its own damn thing, is to talk about Weatherford and the draft board thing. But for purposes right now, let's move. This is it. We're gonna end with the Russell House. So you were already banned from campus, so you weren't there.
I was a few feet away from the campus. That I was banned literally by a section of the city that was outlined by Sumter, Pendleton,
Dude,
Green, and Blossom.
dude.
Mm.
So by the time things came to a head on campus at USC, May 7th, I believe it was, the first day of the strike, the students met for a noontime rally around the flag at the Horseshoe. And things kind of went south, so to speak, there. When there was some students wanted the flag to come down to half mast to honor the students that had been murdered at Kent State just days before. Other students, like one of them was the president-elect of USC, came and they held the rope to prevent the flag from being lowered. And so there was that like kind of standoff right there at the flag, and got potentially really violent. And then the president ordered the flag to come down. I know you weren't there for that because you'd already been banned from campus, because I guess you were at that point, it was because of the draft board stuff, right?
Nobody's counting.
Anyway, you weren't allowed to be on campus. So, but things had already started to build. People had been around the flag, the up and down, and at some point they were like really restless. And the people that had come in to be speakers, they'd been cited and like told to leave campus for violating the speaker policy and all of that. One of them was Broadwater, just trying to give an update on the UFO status, and one of them was a professor from Benedict who was there to sing a song. And that to have them being like hauled off by cops or just inside, it just kind of like ratcheted up the level of tension there at the Horseshoe. And so when the rally was over, there was still a lot of pent up aggression, and so a lot of people wandered away, but there were still a couple hundred people, and they went to the Russell House. And there's like all this difference of opinion whether that was like an organized pre-planned rally, or whether it was just like the spontaneous movement toward the Russell House. I'm still not even sure at this
Oh
point.
no. The thing at the Russell House had been planned well in advance. There were like specific classes. It was what's it called? Not a study group. There was a name for having a teach-in. It was a teach-in about Vietnam, and that there were different things that we were going to do in different classrooms we were going to do it. It was very organized. It wasn't like a spontaneous thing where people occupied the Russell House. We had reserved the Russell House.
No, I know the thing was reserved. That's not my point. Was that there was no plan to make it like a
An occupation.
correct a
You
sit-in.
don't have to occupy something you have reserved. There was no awareness of the people when they went to the Russell House
I'm
that
not
they were going to be prohibited from using the student union.
I know, but I'm just saying I don't this is what I'm not really clear on, whether there was ever an intention to have it to be in confrontational thing, because according
No, I
to
don't think so. I think that
that
that unfolded upon
expected
the
not go there expecting to be arrested.
right. That unfolded in situ.
That's my point. Is like, so you're saying that it wasn't, although people had been planning to have like a what, they weren't expecting to be
Okay.
arrested, is my point, right? It wasn't, people weren't going there that day to be arrested, right?
Right. And
Okay.
I think that that's a real compelling argument that if the book that the university put out missed was that other than the students having been guilty of putting up posters without getting the right stamp on them and me moving chairs and tables around,
Right.
what that's about it. And so this we were in reserved rooms. It was going to be a teach-in. It was well organized. And when the students got there, they said, "You can't be here." And they said, "Well, we don't think so." And so everybody was jacked up. I mean, one of my most prescient quotes at the time was, "We were all crazy." And there may be something that happened that somebody knew that I don't know now because I wasn't or they there at that last moment. I was well plugged in. That somebody knew that they were going to prevent us from being in the Russell House, we would have gone anyway. So that kind of that edge right there. When did you find out that they're not going to let you do it? I don't know when that happened, but the event was not planned to be civil disobedience.
Well,
When
at
it
what point did you, I know you were banned from campus, so at what point did you station yourself at the theater? Was it still Longstreet then?
yeah, it's been Long Street for 180 years.
Okay, so you were, at what point did you get concerned about what was going on campus?
What?
Called in.
What? I guess that would have been way back at the beginning. The bombings of Cambodia and Kent State and all, it was like building up. I don't understand the question.
I know that my point is that like did a planned rally that there was a 2-day strike. Everybody agreed we're going to do a strike, right? You talk about, and I think it's really cool that there was like your wheat wheat papering wheat paste papering those posters all around campus the night before. So it was like a planned strike, a 2-day strike that even the student government approved of.
Mhm,
And that at some point things started to get a little hinky.
mhm.
And so the student government pulls out, and I don't know where you are at that point. Like, were you aware of the flag flap happening at about 2 o'clock before they went to the administrator? I'm just trying to get a chronology of events. Where were you?
Was I in jail? I don't know. Was
No,
I in jail?
this was when you were out there with a walkie-talkie.
I don't know. Waterboard me. Maybe I'll talk. I don't know.
Okay,
See,
so
I don't quite have that day's event in perspective. I remember the scene at the flag.
at some point you're there with a damn walkie-talkie
Oh yeah, I remember that point.
in the Russell House, and people are getting arrested, and people are sitting in front of the damn bus trying to prevent the bus from
Right,
moving. And
right.
from accounts I have read, you have pushed a car in front of uh the the line of cop cars and what to prevent them from leaving. I'm just saying,
Well,
I'm just
that was physically impossible for me to be. That was physically impossible for me to accomplish by being banned from campus and being in front of the Long Street Theater. That was not me. Why are we echoing? Do you hear echo?
no, you sound okay.
Okay, just went away. So the parts I think that are instructive were that the sit-in was um, spontaneous. predicated on the authorities saying you can't do that after we had permission to do it with no clear reason to stop us. I'm using the plural there because us was involved in the planning and concept. I had been, though I was banned from campus, I'd been in the organizing, the planning meetings and things that were happening. I knew what was planned and what was supposed to go on. I wasn't there, so I didn't know that the people were going to sit in and be arrested. But I did. I was on a walkie-talkie, probably the length of 2 football fields away from the Russell House, and they gave the people number warnings to leave or be arrested. The people didn't leave. Some of them left, I think, but the 41 were arrested. No, 40 were arrested. I think I was the 1th of the 40. And they couldn't get the bus out because the anti-war people had surrounded the bus. That's when they brought in the National Guard, and then the Columbia Police came in later, I think. But I was taken away by sled. I don't know whether they'd gotten the bus out by then or not, but I do distinctly remember the Sonny Clark, the guy I just told you about, that was the head of the narcotics thing, and Pete Strom, the head of SLED, and they had their military helmets on, and I could see them from Long Street in front of the Russell House, pointing at me, and the junior cops are jumping up and down and pointing at me, and it was this one of these wonderful kind of like shoot out the OK Corral with Pete Strom walking down the street coming towards me. And he came up and thumped me on the chest and said, "Boy, you are a heap of trouble. I'm revoking your bond." Somewhere along the way, he said, we're going to make an example out of you. But it was all cartoon language. And Vicki Esslinger was there because she had come with a message from Michael Mungo, the original Mungo, to come meet with him. And I'm being driven off in the back of a Ford, and I'm looking out at Vicki having a confrontation with the sled chief. So she said she wasn't beating on his chest, though I kind of remembered that part. Maybe I embellished. But the fact of the matter is that was an illegal arrest. A cop can't arrest you for violating your bond. A judge has to rule that you violated your bond. And that I could have sued them up one side and down the other and all that, except we were all crazy and in so much trouble, it just didn't seem to be a practical path. And they took me, I was in jail for several days during what then came was a lot of the dust up on the streets in the administration building.
Well, do you want to talk at all about that? I guess, yeah, let's wrap it up with that. Do you have any thoughts about?
Well,
say this, Brett, that go ahead.
I think it's real important strategically for revolutionary organizers to understand the dynamics of a mob and the dynamics of a police engaging a mob. The police, in this instance, were a mob against a mob. There was no intelligent force operating the show. And I'm sure that the cops were doing things that some cops are going, "Oh my God, you shouldn't do that." But that the circumstance changed dramatically quickly. And so that's something that you have to be aware of, the potentiality of that happening to even be closely prepared to dealing with it. And the cops weren't. I think we were better prepared than they were, because that was when I remembered that conversation in the Lutheran Center about what we could do would be to dress up like cops and do what they're doing. Let's just back off. And my position recently with the George Floyd dust-ups in Columbia was step back. We can't organize or lead a mob and just let the mob do what it's going to do and try and figure out how you proceed from there. So that was a circumstance that it called for the rational forces trying to organize something simply to step back. And that was my input. And who stepped up was the testosterone driven fraternity boys who were pissed off at what the cops were doing. And that was real clear that there was some type of competition between the fraternities about how many kids got arrested that night. SAE got 43 arrested, and Sigma Nu got 62 arrested, and that they were taking the young arrestees to the reception evaluation center where I served time, cutting their hair off and taking their pictures and putting them back on the streets the next day. And so that was a way to identify the protesters. If they caught them out there with no hair, then they knew they were recidivists. And so there's some strategic lessons there for both sides, and I'm not sure who learned them.
Well, but I mean, you're talking about identifying protesters. Jack Weatherford was there, and that's my point. It's not actually my point. It's the point I've been reading about, the point that resonates with me a lot, in the fact that, well, it's not a fact. The contention is that Jack Weatherford was not just participating in whatever, that he was instigating stuff in the administration building and at the Russell House. And you know how that works. It takes one person to do start riling stuff.
Oh, I do. I've been that one person.
It takes one idiot to bring down an operation, no matter how well you've thought it out. And so when you say that the cops weren't aware, I'm pretty sure they probably were. And I think that.
But wait, the cops weren't aware of what?
You said, I thought that I heard you say that when the stuff at the administration house, at the administration building kind of went south, that it surprised everybody. But I don't think it was a surprise, because I think Jack, this is my theory, that I think Jack was involved with instigating that. And it only takes one person to open a file cabinet, start tossing crap around, everything's, oh, that's a great idea, let's do that. And if he is in fact the head of or even a past chairman of AWARE, he's got some cachet with all the little people that are looking
Right.
up some
Well,
people.
that's a distinction I want you to make. The distinction I want you to make is that Weatherford was an operative inside of a mob doing his. I don't even know if he was there, but if he was there, he was an operative with a plan. My point was the mob had no plan. Mobs don't have plans. The city police were a mob. The protesters were pretty much a mob. There was no coherent strategy between the police that were tear gassing the dormitories and beating students and the students that were being beaten.
There might have been more of a plan than you think.
It could have been, but I think that you're conflating.
That day, what better reason to have them whatever? I mean, because there were people that were saying that there'd been planning meetings. What you're saying was it was like this, there was a spontaneous thing. They're cop informant types that are saying that it was planned. And so it depends.
Wait, the cops are saying that the occupation was planned?
Yes.
Okay. So what I want you to do is to tell me how you're coming up with a conclusion that that's different from what I'm saying, that the police in general that were throwing rocks and bottles and tear gassing students and beating students were part of a plan. I'm saying there was a mob on the part of at least the city police, and there was a mob on part of the students that were just not connected at all. They weren't at meetings, they weren't anything. They just turned out to raise hell. No, and so you had an instance of these opposing forces that didn't have a strategy or a plan. There were strategies and plans woven within that, but those strategies and plans woven within that weren't directing that. I believe you're correct.
Probably wasn't just Jack.
In making an observation that there were, or certainly could have been, provocateurs at the administration building. I do not believe there were provocateurs within the AWARE group at the Russell House. That group knew each other, and if somebody that they didn't know stood up and provoked them, they would not have gone for it. Barbara Herbert was in that crowd, they would not have gone for it. Now, the thing at the Russell House, we don't even know who those people were. Those were people that got pissed off coming out of the honeycombs being beat up. It was a mob. There was a mob at the administration building. It wasn't part of any type of organized effort. That was easier to manipulate. And so
That's true,
for
because
both
people
sides.
that were at the Russell House, they had been a part of Aware, and they got their
Yeah.
asses kicked. So they were already like, there were a couple people that had been out on bond that were at the administration building, but I think in
Yeah.
large part the people that had like had the ass kicked were not there. So this was like a whole nother element. So I don't know.
That I think that remind me, we haven't even spoken to the fact that the dust up at the administration building was over the expulsion of the students that were arrested at Russell House.
That's right, because the
Yeah.
trustees were upstairs talking about it. And so that was what, I mean, it's really hard to know what truth is, but the trustees were up on the second floor. The people had like been protesting stuff, felt like they needed to go. I mean, there was protesting left and right, so it's really hard to get them all straight. But on this particular day, they went up to confront or to ask to. They said that the quote I've read is that the trustee meeting to hear about the fate of the students was closed, and they had a problem with that. So they were going to go down to the administration building and like open up the meeting.
Right.
That sounds legit, right?
It does, except that your notion that it took provocateurs to do that is overlooking the reality that I know more assholes that are theoretically on my side than I do provocateurs. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. But I mean, all you have to do is take one touch off or two touch offs,
Right.
and they look like provocateurs. They're doing the type of thing provocateurs do. I've been in a number of mobs trying to talk people that were in agreement with me off of being an asshole.
All right, Brett, it's been fun.
Come again, my love.